Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a world of glittering ballrooms, whispered secrets behind red velvet curtains, and one mind so ahead of its time that even the military shrugged and said, maybe later. You'll slip into the jeweled shoes of Hedy Lamarr, not just a Hollywood siren, but a woman who invented the foundation for Wi-Fi. In between filming black and white close-ups, the lights are soft. The champagne is colder than your new husband's personality. The silk clings to your shoulders like a question mark. And even though the world thinks you're just another face on the silver screen, you already know you're something else entirely. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as always, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stir beneath layers of satin sheets in a sunlit bedroom the size of a tennis court. The air smells faintly of old money and beeswax polish. You're 21 and married to Fritz Mandl, one of the richest arms dealers in Austria. He keeps your jewelry case full and your social calendar fuller. But don't be fooled. This isn't a fairy tale. You're not a princess. You're a prisoner in pearls. At breakfast, the staff serves imported coffee and the softest pastries. Across from you, Fritz reads Die Presse, murmuring occasionally about shipments and orders. You pretend to care. What you're really doing is remembering the lines from your last play, the one you abandoned when you married him, because marriage, apparently, was the only acceptable plot twist for a woman like you. Fritz isn't abusive, at least, not in the ways that leave bruises. He's possessive, clingy, overbearing, like a golden cage with a velvet perch. You can't go out alone. You can't take acting roles. You're expected to smile, look stunning, and keep your political opinions and brilliant brain to yourself. At night, you lie awake beside a man who talks in his sleep, sometimes muttering about explosive yields and artillery specs. You listen carefully. You're not sure why yet, but something in you, something quiet and coiled, catalogs the details. Now here's where things start feeling like a Bond movie with way too much schnitzel. Fritz holds extravagant dinner parties. Generals from Germany, businessmen from Italy, arms manufacturers with too many medals and too few scruples. The champagne flows. The cigars billow. You smile politely and serve more hors d'oeuvres than a Viennese duchess. You also eavesdrop like a total pro. One night, while pouring cognac, you overhear a Nazi official explain how radio-controlled torpedoes could be jammed easily. Fixed frequencies, he snorts. All the enemy has to do is broadcast noise on the same channel. Boom. Nothing gets through. You nod and say something about the soufflé, but later in the bath, you replay that line over and over. Fixed frequencies. Predictable. Vulnerable. You start doodling diagrams in the margins of your vanity mirror with eyeliner. Lines and waves and dots. Just vague enough to look like boredom, but just structured enough to mean something. There's a melody in all this. A rhythm just waiting to be played. Here's your quirky tidbit. Fritz reportedly tried to buy up every copy of Ecstasy, the racy film you starred in before you met him, because he hated the idea of anyone else seeing you nude. That's right, your husband was basically the 1930s version of an angry YouTube comment. And despite all that money, he couldn't erase your past or, as it turns out, control your future. Historians still argue whether Fritz truly understood how intelligent you were, or if he simply viewed you as a glittering possession. Either way, he made the classic villain mistake, underestimating the woman in the room. By late 1937, you've had enough. Enough of the lockdown lifestyle. Enough of the whispers in hallways. Enough of being treated like a monogrammed handbag with legs. So you plot an escape. And when you finally make your move, it's less storming the castle and more stagecraft meets espionage. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. For now, you're still trapped. Still performing the role of Mrs. Mandl. Nodding graciously as your husband toasts the Third Reich's engineering genius. All while you file away names, phrases, and vulnerabilities in that brain of yours that no one's bothered to notice. You sleep in a mansion lined with oil paintings and chandeliers, but what keeps you warm isn't wealth. It's the quiet thrill of knowing you're smarter than every man in the room. And soon you'll prove it. You sip tea with trembling fingers, but it isn't from nerves, it's calculation. You've spent weeks, months, really, studying the routines of the house staff, memorizing the shift changes of the guards at the gates, tracking the moods of your controlling husband like a seasoned meteorologist tracking barometric pressure. Fritz has gone to Berlin for a business trip. That gives you just enough time. You fake a headache, stay in your room, and slip into the role of sickly wife, with the grace of an actress who once cried on cue for an entire act. No one suspects a thing. Not yet. Your escape starts in the dead of night. You've drugged your maid's wine, just enough to knock her out, nothing dangerous, and stolen her uniform. You pin your hair back, smear a bit of ash on your cheek, and tuck a pouch of diamonds into your undergarments. You've sewn your jewelry into the lining of your coat. Practical, portable, and as glittery as your exit deserves to be. You creep down the back stairs, your heels muffled by thick socks, your breath quick and shallow. The guard at the servant's entrance barely looks up. Just another chambermaid headed out on errands. You thank him softly, forcing yourself not to run. Running gets noticed. Vienna is a tangle of cobblestones and old secrets. You disappear into the streets before the house even notices you're gone. Within 24 hours, you're on a train to Paris under a fake name. You're no longer Mrs. Mandel. You're not even Hedy Kiesler. You're a nobody in a threadbare coat and scuffed shoes. But you've never felt more powerful. Here's a fringe tidbit. One version of your escape includes a scene where you seduce a border officer to get safe passage. Is it true? Did you really flirt your way across Europe? Historians still argue whether that spicy detail is fact or just studio-era spin. But honestly, would you blame people for romanticizing it? By the time Fritz realizes you're missing, you're already halfway to London. You've swapped trains, changed clothes twice, and sold a brooch for enough cash to make it to Calais. You're moving through Europe like smoke, formless, fast, and impossible to catch. You book passage to the United States on the Normandy, the crown jewel of transatlantic luxury. First-class dining, gloved waiters, velvet chairs. It's as if your old life is chasing you across the sea, trying to seduce you back. But you're not biting. One evening on the ship, you meet a man with thick eyebrows, a loud voice, and a studio contract in his pocket. Louis B. Mayer, head of MGM. He's scouting for exotic talent to bring to Hollywood. And suddenly, there you are, radiant, mysterious, multilingual, with cheekbones that could carve marble and a name that sounds like music. He offers you a contract. You haggle like a pro. You know what you're worth. You don't just want a salary. You want control. You don't just want roles. You want range. You arrive in New York to flashbulbs and headlines. You've gone from fugitive to film star before your heels have even hit the pavement. It's 1938, and America is buzzing with radio dramas, jazz clubs, and the looming shadow of another world war. But you've reinvented yourself entirely. Back in Vienna, they'll say you vanished. They'll whisper theories, but none of them will guess the truth. That you slipped away not just to survive, but to change the world. You trade the maid's uniform for a gown, the scuffed shoes for satin heels, but you keep the steel in your spine. And as you step into your first Hollywood spotlight, you know the camera sees only your face, not your mind. Not yet, but that's fine. For now, there's a studio chauffeur waiting with your name on a sign. You climb into the car, fingers still raw from the cold of the Channel wind, coat heavy with unspoken plans. You're about to become Hedy Lamarr, and no one, not the Nazis, not Fritz, not even MGM, has any idea what's coming. You land in Hollywood like a comet, undeniably beautiful, a little mysterious, and definitely not from around here. You step onto the MGM lot, where the air smells like pancake makeup and ambition, and people shout action, more often than they say hello. Everyone stares. You don't just enter a room, you alter the temperature. But make no mistake, beneath the satin gloves and mascara lies a steel-trap mind, and a plan. They change your name, of course. Hedy Kiesler sounds too foreign. too complicated, too Jewish. You become Hedy Lamarr, a name plucked from thin air by Louis B. Mayer's wife, inspired by a long-forgotten silent film star. Just like that, your old life is gone, vanished in the shuffle of contract clauses and stage lighting. Your first big role? Algiers. You barely speak English, but no one minds. You're not cast for your diction. They say things like, she doesn't need to talk. Just look at her. You raise an eyebrow at that, but you play along. For now, off-screen, you start buying technical manuals, engineering textbooks. You learn English by reading user guides for engines and film projectors. You doodle diagrams on napkins during studio lunch breaks. You tinker with gadgets in your trailer like some kind of Art Deco Da Vinci. It's your secret rebellion. If they won't cast you as someone smart, you'll just be smart off camera. A lesser-known tidbit? You once tried to sell an idea for a traffic light upgrade to the city of Los Angeles. It got rejected, of course. Too strange, too forward-thinking. You. Evenings, you attend premieres and press parties. You pose on red carpets, sign autographs, smile through reporters calling you the most beautiful woman in the world. You start to realize that the world loves a beautiful woman, as long as she doesn't remind them she's also smarter than they are. And here's your first mainstream historical fact. During this period, you were one of the highest-paid actresses in Hollywood. You didn't just light up the screen. You made the studio rich. Mayer knew it. Everyone knew it. But they still assumed you were just a pretty face. During downtime between films, you meet with a few eccentric creatives. One of them is Howard Hughes. Yes, that Howard Hughes, aviation tycoon and amateur recluse in training. He loans you a small lab bench and some equipment. You repay him by redesigning his airplane wings to mimic bird structures. Because, of course, you did. Historians still argue whether Hughes took your idea seriously, or whether he saw it as some charming party trick from a famous actress. But one thing's certain, you impressed him. And Hughes didn't impress easily. Your evenings are spent at lavish cocktail parties, where directors pitch you their next big project, and producers make jokes about your IQ while never quite meeting your eyes. But you're patient. You know how to play the long game. And besides, something bigger is brewing. You attend a dinner party in Los Angeles, artsy crowd, mostly misfits and geniuses with loud opinions. You're seated next to a man named George Antheil. He's a composer, an oddball, a tinkerer, known for writing wild, dissonant music and synchronizing 10 pianos to play at once. You talk about Bach, then torpedoes, then frequency interference. Yes, torpedoes. You tell him about that dinner party in Vienna, the one where German officers bragged about jamming Allied torpedo signals. He leans in. You start sketching ideas on the back of the menu. The solution, you suggest, lies in frequency hopping. What if a torpedo and its controller could jump from frequency to frequency in sync, too fast for the enemy to jam, like two dancers switching steps in perfect rhythm, like a pianist syncing with a player piano roll? George's eyes light up. Suddenly, it's not a dinner party anymore. It's a brainstorming lab. That night, you both go home with a shared mission. Beauty and brains. Music and war tech. Movie star and mad composer. You're about to invent something the U.S. Navy doesn't even know it needs. But for now, you play your part. You smile for the cameras, say your lines, and go home to a cluttered drafting table covered in patent sketches. You are Hedy Lamarr, and Hollywood still has no idea. Your days are filled with camera flashes and carefully curated scripts, but your nights? That's when the real performance begins. You and George Antheil become an unlikely duo, a silver screen siren and a modernist composer plotting wartime tech like it's a noir film with an absurdly nerdy twist. You meet in cluttered living rooms, scribble on napkins, argue over acoustics and antennae. He's all nervous energy and theories. You're all focus and finesse. Together it works. You borrow from his world of player pianos, those ghostly music boxes that play songs from punched rolls of paper. What if, you suggest, a radio signal could hop between frequencies the way a melody moves across keys? If both ends, the ship and the torpedo, used the same pattern, they'd stay in sync, and anyone trying to jam the signal would be out of luck. Here's your mainstream historical fact. This frequency-hopping concept is now widely regarded as the foundation of modern spread-spectrum communication, the very backbone of technologies like GPS, Bluetooth, and Wi-Fi. Not bad for a dinner-table brainstorm. The device you imagine uses 88 frequencies, because of course it does. That's the number of keys on a piano. You two design a mechanical synchronization method based on punched rolls, like those in Antheil's experimental compositions. It's beautifully analog, strangely poetic, and absolutely military grade. George handles the diagrams. You draft the technical description. Your fingers, more used to holding makeup brushes and film scripts, now grip pencils and rulers with equal grace. You mail off the paperwork, and in 1942, the U.S. Patent Office grants you patent number 2,292,387 for Secret Communication System. You're officially inventors. And then nothing. You present it to the Navy, fully expecting some cigar-chomping admiral to say, "My God, this changes everything." But they don't. They barely blink. One officer allegedly tells you to stick to acting. Another questions the seriousness of a woman and a composer offering tactical advice. Fringe tidbit? Some speculate that the Navy just didn't have the engineering capability to implement such a system mechanically at the time. Others whisper that your gender and George's avant-garde musical resume made the brass dismiss the idea outright. Historians still argue whether it was logistical limitations or plain old sexism that buried the patent. Whatever the cause, the technology gets shelved, filed away like a movie script no one wants to greenlight. You're crushed, but not broken. While your invention gathers dust in a drawer, you throw yourself into the war effort in other ways. You sell war bonds, millions worth, using the very same beauty they dismissed. You flirt. You dazzle. You kiss soldiers on the cheek for the cameras and sign posters and lipstick. You use the tools you have, even if they don't include frequency-hopping transmitters. There's a strange irony to it all. You could have helped win the war with circuitry. Instead, they prefer you on parade floats. At one Bond rally, the general introduces you as the inventor of morale. You smile. You thank him. But inside, you grit your teeth. You start to notice the loneliness that comes from being underestimated. It's a quiet, constant thing, like the low hum of a badly tuned radio. Even your lovers, your directors, your friends, they think they know you. They don't. You're not just a face. You're not just a voice. You're an engine waiting to be revved. Still, you play your part. Studio contracts need fulfilling. Films need filming. You shoot White Cargo and Samson and Delilah and a dozen others, playing exotic, mysterious women whose minds are only ever implied. But at night, you still sketch, still invent. A better soda tablet, a new design for tissue boxes, a safer aviation navigation system. Your ideas pile up like unanswered fan mail. You send letters to engineers. You study new patents. You stay curious, even as the world stays blind. And yet, something inside you doesn't give up. You know your time will come. It always does. Just not always when or how you expect. You're on set again. Desert makeup caked onto your skin. Gold cuffs tight around your wrists. Pretending to be a biblical temptress and Samson and Delilah. The lights are hot. The dialogue is dull. You flirt with a man playing strong and silent, while your brain hums with waveforms and circuitry. Between takes, you scribble on the back of your call sheet. Not lines, wires. Not cues, frequencies. The assistant director jokes that you're always doodling like a bored schoolgirl. You smile sweetly and nod. Let them think that. Hollywood keeps boxing you into roles. Exotic beauty, scheming vixen, tragic queen. Your face is everywhere. Your voice dubbed into multiple languages. But the truth? You're not acting anymore. You're performing yourself as a mask. What they see on screen is only what you allow. Every now and then, someone in the press tries to ask about your inventions, but the studio shuts it down fast. Can't have people thinking too hard about their bombshells. That might ruin the illusion. And yet, your mind stays lit. Always. Like a neon sign, no one notices buzzing in the background. Here's your historical anchor. By the mid-1940s, Hedy Lamarr had one of the most recognizable faces on the planet. Life magazine photoplay. Look, they couldn't get enough of you. But none of them mentioned the patent. None of them asked about Antile. In public, you were the queen of MGM. In private, you were the queen of untapped potential. In the quiet of your home, you tinker. You install a small workshop, test tubes, soldering iron, a sketch pad full of mechanical dreams. One designed for a better aircraft wing here. A blueprint for a modified gas mask there. A never-patented soda tablet that was supposed to dissolve into flavored drink. Only it tasted like sadness and old chalk. Even your failures have character. You share ideas with studio crew sometimes. You ask cameramen about radio waves, stunt guys about crash physics. The props department starts avoiding you because you ask too many technical questions. Heaven forbid a starlet have follow-ups. And then, something odd. One of your letters to the military, this time regarding signal modulation, receives a polite acknowledgement. Not a thank you. Not encouragement. Just acknowledgement. It's something. A flicker. But it never sparks into flame. Here's your quirky tidbit. You once claimed to have invented a new kind of bouillon cube. Chicken soup in your pocket, basically. Whether you were serious or joking remains unclear. But you brought it up more than once, possibly to test who was actually listening. Historians still argue whether these non-military inventions were a form of satire or a sincere attempt to engage with everyday problems. Were you poking fun at the idea of being a domestic woman? Or just trying sincerely to improve the soup game? Either way, the message stays the same. Your brain didn't stop when the cameras did. The late 1940s blur together in Technicolor and disappointment. You're typecast. You're underused. You grow bored, then bitter, then bored again. You marry. You divorce. You adopt children. You buy a mansion and fill it with silence. At one point, you write a memoir, but it reads more like a romance novel than a record. You leave out the hard stuff, the science, the loneliness, the invention that could have saved lives. Maybe you don't want to remember, or maybe you know they still wouldn't believe it. The world moves on. The war ends. New stars replace you on the marquees. You attend fewer parties. You receive fewer scripts. And the patent, it expires, unrenewed, unused, unacknowledged. The Navy never paid you, never contacted you. They'd filed your invention away like junk mail. And then, years later, quietly repurposed it, behind closed doors, without credit. Still, you don't go on a crusade. You don't sue. You don't scream. You just go quiet, and then quieter still. But you remember. You remember everything. Because even if no one's listening now, you're still broadcasting, still frequency hopping, still waiting for the signal to be heard. You find yourself sitting across from George again, not at a dinner party this time, but in a quiet corner of cafe where the sugar never seems to dissolve and the coffee tastes like someone filtered it through World War II ration paper. The war is over. The Allies won. The world is rebuilding, but you're not celebrating. You're watching your invention drift further into obscurity. George stirs his bitter coffee and shrugs, all fidget and sigh. They'll figure it out someday, he says. Maybe in 100 years. You force a smile, but inside, you're boiling. Because they did figure it out. Sort of. Rumors start surfacing. Whispers that the military has begun experimenting with something suspiciously similar to your design. Not with player piano rolls. They've moved on to electronic synchronization. Faster, cleaner, easier to build at scale. You recognize the bones of it. That graceful leap from frequency to frequency. That's your dance. Your rhythm. You and George composed it. Together. Mainstream historical fact. In the 1960s, 2 decades after you filed your patent, the U.S. military adopted spread-spectrum technology for secure communications during the Cuban Missile Crisis. A version of what you invented was finally implemented, just without your name attached. No ceremony, no credit, just a silent nod across history's dim hallway. And that patent, it had expired in 1959. Gone. Public domain, which means the government could use it freely, and did. You walked the beach some nights, sand crunching underfoot, thinking about what might have been. Not the movies or the marriages, that's all a blur now. But the missed chance, the lives your invention could have saved sooner. The decades it took for anyone to take it seriously. You don't share this with many people. What would be the point? You're still introduced at parties as the one from ecstasy. Never the one who could have changed the course of naval warfare. Here's your fringe tidbit. In the late 50s, you try to make a comeback. Not in Hollywood, but with inventions. You pitch a skin-tightening device, a new kind of plastic for aircraft, even dabble in chemistry again. Most people smile politely. None of it lands. Historians still argue whether you truly walked away from invention out of frustration, or because the world simply stopped listening. Maybe it was both. Maybe inventors need something rarer than genius, timing. George goes back to music. You drift through marriages. 1, 2, 6. Each one a little shorter, a little less hopeful. You find brief sparks, a child's laughter, a walk through sun-drenched California orchards, but they never last. Your invention outlives your romances. Then something strange begins to happen in the 1980s and 90s. A handful of engineers, tech historians, and patent nerds begin unearthing your story. Articles are published. Speeches made. One day, someone calls to say you've been named a pioneer of wireless communications. You hang up. It's almost laughable. After all this time, they're just now catching up. Another call comes. This time it's from the Electronic Frontier Foundation. They want to give you an award. A real one. With a plaque. And a crowd. You decline the invitation. You're in your 80s by then, rarely leaving your Florida apartment. You do accept the award, though, by mail. It sits quietly on your mantel, nestled between old movie reels and a ceramic ashtray from the 1950s. Here's your quirky fact of the night. Even in your later years, you insisted that you still had more inventions in you. One idea involved a new kind of shampoo dispenser. Another had to do with traffic flow. You joked. Improving the world should never be boring. And finally, at long last, the press starts to change its tone. Headlines appear. Hedy Lamarr, not just a pretty face. The woman who invented Wi-Fi. Hollywood's secret genius. You smirk every time you see one. Took them long enough. Still, part of you wonders what would have happened if they'd listened then, when the stakes were higher. When the war still raged, and you had fire in your fingertips. But the other part of you, the part that never stopped sketching on napkins, knows this. You planted a signal, and even if it took decades to be received, it finally was. The dance of frequencies never really stopped. You just played it long before anyone could hear the tune. The waves crash lazily outside your Florida condo as you stare at the glowing hum of your old television. News anchors blather about satellites, encrypted signals, and the rise of cellular phones. The language is technical, but you understand it. You understood it decades ago. You turn the volume down. It's more satisfying to hear it in your head anyway. The gentle leap from one frequency to the next, like dancers switching partners mid-song. Graceful, invisible, unstoppable. Just like you'd imagined. You run your fingers along the edge of your patent plaque. Heavy, cold, belated. Let's rewind a little. Remember the player piano? That beautiful ghost-operated machine, spitting out music from a coded scroll of holes? That was the inspiration, your secret weapon. You and George figured out that if two devices shared the same pattern, a kind of mechanical choreography, they could shift radio frequencies together, in sync, hopping around like jazz musicians improvising from the same sheet. You even tested it with toy pianos. Silly, yes, but elegant, because underneath the novelty was an idea that would eventually beat in the heart of every smartphone, GPS tracker, Wi-Fi router, and secure military communication system, all of them dancing to your tune. Mainstream fact. Frequency hopping is now a cornerstone of spread-spectrum communication. Without it, our modern digital world, the one with satellites, drones, Bluetooth earbuds, and encrypted apps, would be a lot noisier and a lot less secure. You invented a new kind of silence, one that could carry secrets, and for most of your life, no one cared. You think back to how it all felt at the start. You, fresh off the boat from Europe, fleeing a war you barely escaped. You, dazzling the press while scribbling diagrams behind your scripts. You, ignored and underestimated, yet never out of ideas. Hollywood never quite knew what to do with a woman like you. Too clever, too commanding, too unwilling to be just one thing. Fringe tidbit: George once tried to pitch your invention to RCA, hoping the entertainment industry might bite if the military wouldn't. It didn't work. Nobody wanted a torpedo piano. Go figure. Historians still argue whether frequency hopping needed to wait for the age of digital electronics to really flourish, or if, had the Navy paid attention, the analog version could have changed the outcome of the war. Some believe your invention was simply ahead of its time. Others say the world just wasn't ready to take women like you seriously. But the world caught up. Eventually, in the 1990s, an entire generation of techies started rediscovering you. Suddenly, you weren't just a pinup in black and white. You were a prophet in patent ink. Women in STEM began citing you as a pioneer. Conference panels buzzed with your name. Even college lectures started referencing your frequency-hopping brilliance, usually after a dramatic pause where the professor asked, "Did you know this was invented by a Hollywood actress?" Quirky, right? One day, a kid from MIT sends you a letter, thanking you for making his Wi-Fi possible. You don't respond, but you fold it carefully and slip it into a drawer with old photos and cracked sunglasses from the 50s. You wonder if he knows about the wars, the lonely nights, the piano rolls, the bouncing signals. Sometimes, at night, you listen to the static on your radio, not to hear music, but to feel the frequencies underneath. You imagine your invention still out there, humming beneath space launches and submarine transmissions and text messages sent at 3 a.m. You smile. You don't need a standing ovation. You don't even need them to remember your name. But still, you do wish they'd spelled it right on that science award. It's Lamarr, not Lamarr. But that's okay. You were never really after applause. You were after answers. You lean against the cool tile of your kitchen counter, fingers tracing the rim of your coffee mug. Though the coffee's long since gone cold, a newspaper lies folded nearby, the front page bragging about another communications breakthrough, some new encrypted signal tech for the military. You recognize the bones of it immediately. Same concept, different skin. It's like looking at your own child, dressed by strangers. You allow yourself a small smirk. Once upon a time, your name was in lights. Now it's buried in patents, in schematics, in the silent DNA of the tech that runs the world. You're not sure which version of fame you prefer. Probably neither. Probably both. It's 1997, and finally, someone gets it. The Electronic Frontier Foundation gives you and George posthumous credit. Well, George's is posthumous. Yours is just barely not. You're in your 80s. Your eyesight's worse. Your voice has softened. But your brain? Still hopping frequencies. Still making invisible connections. The award is titled the Pioneer Award. And yes, it arrives by mail. You don't attend the ceremony. You haven't done public events in years. But you do open the box. You hold the plaque. It feels heavier than expected. Or maybe it's not the plaque. Maybe it's what it represents. You press your hand against it. Cold metal. War memory. Mainstream fact. The U.S. Navy finally declassified its use of spread-spectrum technology, long after it had quietly become essential to secure battlefield communications, satellites, and missiles. Only then did the press begin to stitch together the truth of where it all began. It wasn't in a lab. It was at a dinner party, between a movie star and a mad composer. But while the tech world starts whispering your name again, Hollywood mostly stays silent. They remember costumes, the scandals, the cheekbones, not the circuits. You still get the odd letter from a fan or two. One girl writes that she saw your name in a computer science textbook and thought, "Wait, that Hedy Lamarr?" You laugh for a full minute. Fringe tidbit? In the 90s, a German documentary titled Calling Hedy Lamarr features old footage of you, your voice crackling through the decades. You say, "The brains of people are more interesting than looks, I think." And somewhere, millions of women nod. Historians still argue whether you were truly forgotten or simply edited. Was it neglect or design? Did they miss your genius or erase it? Was the world allergic to the idea that a beautiful woman could also be brilliant? Probably yes. Probably all of it. You settle into the rhythm of your twilight years. Reclusive but content, distant but sharp. Your inventions slow, but they don't stop. You scribble out ideas into the margins of books, onto napkins, sometimes even on the back of receipts. You once joked that you should have invented something useful, like a machine to keep men quiet. One of your children finds a box after your passing, filled with half-finished diagrams and barely readable notes. One sketch looks like a rocket. Another looks like a hybrid between a cat feeder and a microwave. Who knows what they were? Who knows what they could have become? You become, oddly enough, a tech world icon after you're gone. Your face appears on t-shirts that say, "Invent like a girl." Your name dropped in TED Talks. A Google Doodle appears in your honor, complete with animations of piano rolls and signal waves. The internet finally meets the woman who helped build it. And you're not around to see it. But you already knew it would happen. You knew that signals don't always arrive on time. But they arrive. They always arrive. You hold the war bond like it's a magic wand, but it's really just a piece of paper and a wink. You're standing on a stage beneath a sweltering tent, sweat beading beneath your powder. A sea of soldiers cheers, not because they know you invented anything, but because they recognize your face from the silver screen and posters pinned in barracks. You blow a kiss, sign another photograph, then pitch your voice up just enough to be heard over the music. By a Bond won the war. It's patriotic theater, and you perform your lines perfectly. But behind the scenes, you're livid, because this isn't how you wanted to help. You wanted transmitters, synchronized oscillators, real tools that could have saved lives in the Atlantic. Instead, they hand you lipstick and an itinerary. Still, you keep at it. You sell more bonds than most senators. Some events rake in millions in a single day. You even auction off kisses, $1.50, 000 a peck. The line stretches longer than a rations queue. And yet, the irony is suffocating. Mainstream fact, during World War II, many Hollywood stars pitched in. Clark Gable trained as a gunner. Jimmy Stewart flew bombing missions. And Hedy Lamarr sold war bonds with a smile. Only one of those people, however, held a U.S. military technology patent. And it wasn't the guy from It's a Wonderful Life. Still, you play your role. At one event, you overhear a soldier whisper to his buddy, "That's Hedy Lamarr. She's like Venus and Einstein had a baby." You nearly laugh aloud. Not bad, but Venus got better press. Fringe tidbit? You once offered to donate your patent to the U.S. Navy for free. Zero compensation. You just wanted them to use it. They declined. Suggested, instead, that you help morale. As if secure torpedo guidance couldn't boost morale just a tiny bit. Historians still argue whether that rejection was due to internal bureaucracy, outdated hardware, or plain disbelief that a woman in evening gowns and rouge had out-invented half the War Department. Probably all three. You continue your career, shifting between studio sets and government stages. The war churns on, and every time a newspaper mentions lost Allied torpedoes, your teeth clench. You know you could have helped. You tried to help. But you're a woman, and worse, a beautiful one. That made people forget you were also dangerous. As the war ends, you retreat. Not just from Hollywood spotlight, but from the public's expectations. You're tired of smiling for cameras that never see you clearly. You're tired of pitching in when no one will pitch back. You start turning scripts down. The roles are repetitive now. Mysterious foreigner, sultry spy, doomed queen. You've played them all, and always without depth. You want meat, complexity. Someone who isn't just arm candy with eyeliner. Spoiler, they never offer it. So you begin to fade from the public eye. Not disappear, just ghost out, a little less visible each year. You marry again, and again, and again. 6 in total, like some kind of romantic experiment. You joke that you weren't unlucky in love, just overinvested. None of the marriages last, but each one teaches you something. Mostly that men don't handle brilliant women well, especially brilliant women with better ideas than them. In one marriage, you mention your invention. He says, "That's cute, honey." You file for divorce the next month. You buy property, paint, raise your kids, read technical journals. You never stop inventing, but the patent sits expired in a drawer, silent, forgotten. For now, you still tune in to radio broadcasts, flip through engineering journals, keep notebooks full of ideas, a lipstick holder that opens with one hand, a tissue box that doesn't jam. You even tinker with a better flavor, coating for pills. Nothing makes it to market. You're not in it for profit. You're chasing something else. The same thing you've always chased. That moment when an idea clicks. That moment when a frequency changes. That perfect, rare silence between the signals. You're sitting on the porch of your Florida condo, wrapped in a light blanket even though the breeze is barely cool. A transistor radio hums beside you, tuned to static. Not a voice, not a song, just the hiss of invisible things trying to connect. You close your eyes and listen. That sound is familiar. It's the sound of being misunderstood. The 1960s roll in like a tide of change. Rockets, civil rights marches, color television. You watch the world rewire itself while quietly, your own wiring begins to fray. Not your mind, no, that's still sharp, but your presence in the public eye starts to dim. You've officially stepped away from Hollywood. No premieres, no photo shoots, no more camera-ready cheekbones. And strangely, no one comes looking for you. Here's your mainstream historical fact. After your final film in 1958, The Female Animal, you retire from acting. By then, your name is fading from marquees, but your influence, though hidden, is beginning to ripple through military labs and communication towers across the world. Of course, no one tells you that. The Navy has quietly been adapting your frequency hopping concept, converting it into electronic form. The mechanical piano roll idea was clunky, sure, but the core, the brilliance of hopping frequencies to outmaneuver jamming, that part holds strong. Some whisper your patent helped during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Others claim it served as the blueprint for early satellite encryption. But still, no official recognition. Just silence. Historians still argue whether your invention was the cornerstone of spread-spectrum tech or simply one of several ideas in the ether at the time. But ask any radio engineer, they know your name, even if they think it's spelled with one R. Here's a quirky tidbit. Sometime in the late 1960s, you get caught shoplifting. A few cosmetics, a bit of food. It's an odd blip in your story. Famous, wealthy Hedy Lamarr, stealing cheap items she could easily afford. Tabloids eat it up. But for you, it's less about need and more about control. For once, you decide to take something, rather than waiting for permission. Afterward, the court dismisses the charges. You send out a short, dismissive statement. The public shakes its head. Another scandal. Another has been. But in truth, you don't care. Your eyes are already on something else. You're watching the rise of telecommunications. Satellite dishes sprout like mushrooms. Cordless phones become household staples. The first crude cell phones appear. Massive bricks that look more weapon than tool. And every single one of them, whether they know it or not, owes a tiny bit of itself to you. But no one calls. No one knocks. Recognition, when it finally comes, drips in slowly, like rain through a ceiling crack. In 1985, a science newsletter references your patent. Then a few obscure journals pick it up. Then a tech conference. And finally, someone asks the big question. Wait, Hedy Lamarr invented what? You chuckle when you read that. It always takes them a while. And so begins your unexpected second act. Not as a screen goddess, but as a forgotten innovator, suddenly rediscovered by a generation raised on microchips and frequency modulation. Engineers write letters. Students name their science fair projects after you. Women in tech start putting your photo on their lockers, right next to Marie Curie and Ada Lovelace. You go from pinup to prototype. Still, there's no parade, no studio apology, no military medal, just the slow, quiet spread of a truth too long delayed. And honestly, that's kind of perfect, because your work, the real work, was never about applause. It was about connection, invisible signals dancing between unseen stations, quiet brilliance, humming just beneath the static. Your invention survives, not because someone remembered it, but because it worked, because you worked, even when no one was listening, even when no one asked. You wake up one morning in your quiet Florida apartment to the sound of the mail sliding across the tile. A heavy envelope lands with a solid thump, thicker than a bill, too clean to be junk. You shuffle over, open it, and out slides a plaque. Shiny, official looking, engraved with words that take a second to sink in recognition of Hedy Lamarr, co-inventor of frequency-hopping spread-spectrum technology. It's from some organization you've never heard of, another foundation with a long acronym and a lot of engineers. They want to honor you. They want to credit you. They want to put your name in the history books where it always should have been. You sit down slowly, the plaque heavy in your lap. It feels like a strange kind of victory, a quiet one, not the kind you dress up for, not at this age, but you allow yourself a rare smile, because now finally they know. Mainstream historical fact. In 1997, you were honored with the Electronic Frontier Foundation's Pioneer Award, recognizing your contribution to technologies that would become essential to digital communication. You were the first woman to receive it. You didn't attend the ceremony. You didn't want the cameras or the speeches, but you accepted the award. You held it in your hands. That was enough. Somewhere in the world, someone's unlocking their phone with facial recognition. Someone else is navigating with GPS. A teenager is sending a text from a subway. And all of it, every encrypted wireless signal, owes something to a woman who once doodled blueprints between takes on a film set. Fringe tidbit. Later in life, you had a habit of calling people who annoyed you and pretending to be your own secretary. You'd say in a posh voice, "Miss Lamarr is unavailable at this time." Then hang up. Most believed it. Honestly, you probably had more fun doing that than half your red carpet interviews. Historians still argue whether your reclusiveness in later years was a product of being overlooked or a decision made out of exhaustion. Maybe you were just done waiting for people to catch up, because you were always ahead, always one signal hop beyond the conversation. By now, your children are grown. The studio contracts are old paper. Your mansion is long gone, but your mind, still full of ideas. You scrawl new concepts into margins of magazines, post-its, grocery lists. You dream up a new kind of air traffic system, a wearable device that delivers medications, a fabric that changes texture depending on temperature. None of them get built, but you're not bothered. You invented frequency hopping. You already changed the world. Some nights, you hear static on the radio and smile. You imagine your original signal, patent number 2,292,387, still bouncing quietly between stars. Not lost, just looping, waiting for someone to notice again. The world may forget names, but it remembers function. And yours is everywhere now. In satellites, in routers, in Bluetooth speakers humming softly in coffee shops you'll never walk into. Your invention pulses across the globe. Invisible, indispensable, indisputably yours. You're old now, not in that tragic, forgotten Hollywood way. More like a lighthouse that stood too long in the wind. Worn, yes, but still strong, still anchored, still quietly watching the world sail by. Your name has resurfaced, like a buried pearl dragged back into daylight by the tides of tech historians and curious journalists. But they still don't quite get you. They write articles with headlines like "Beauty and the Brains" and "The Bombshell Who Invented Wi-Fi." As if the two ideas, beauty and brains, still can't comfortably live in the same sentence without a raised eyebrow. You sip your tea and mutter, "About time," to no one in particular. Here's your mainstream historical fact. In the 2000s, Your invention was officially recognized by major tech organizations and military historians. You've been credited, at long last, as the unlikely mother of modern wireless communication. But the apology never really came. No one from the Navy ever called. No studio sent a "we were wrong" telegram. Still, you're remembered now, not just as Delilah or Tondaleo, or the woman in the scandalous film Ecstasy, but as Hedy Lamarr, engineer, inventor, woman who saw beyond her time. Fringe tidbit. You once told an interviewer that your only regret was that the world doesn't recognize women's brains as much as their busts. The quote ran in Newsweek under the headline, "Hedy Hits Back." It's become a quiet anthem in feminist tech circles. Historians still argue whether your fame helped or hindered your invention's journey. Some say your Hollywood allure gave the patent buzz it wouldn't have otherwise had. Others believe it doomed the idea to novelty status, something amusing, not serious. In either case, the result was the same: 20 years of silence. But now, young engineers hang your photo on lab walls. High school science fairs feature posters with your name. Documentaries frame your face with oscillating signal waves and Morse code beeps. You've become a kind of myth. And you laugh at that, because if they just listened back then, none of this would feel like discovery. It would feel like justice. You begin declining interviews, not out of bitterness, but out of peace. You've said what needed to be said. You've seen your name where it matters, in textbooks, in code, in frequency. And besides, the world has finally begun catching up. People use GPS without knowing how it works. They sync Bluetooth speakers in their kitchen. They walk through airports with Wi-Fi signals bouncing invisibly around them, and your fingerprints are on all of it, even if they don't see them. You never needed a spotlight. You needed signal strength. And now, you've got 5 bars. You still jot things down sometimes. Quirky half-inventions that come to you at 3 a.m. A magnetized handbag. A chair that heats itself. A sun hat with built-in radio. You leave these notes in drawers, on napkins, inside book margins. Someday, maybe someone will find them. Maybe they'll smile. Maybe they'll build one. And in that moment, you'll have invented again. Not for the world that ignored you, but for the one that's listening now. You rarely go out now. Not because the world has forgotten you, but because you've already done your part. You watch from a distance as new names rise in film, in science, in politics. You don't envy them. Fame is slippery. You know that better than most. Instead, you spend your days in quiet invention, not of things, necessarily, but of thoughts, of reimaginings, of what-ifs. What if they'd taken your frequency-hopping idea in 1942 and actually used it? Could it have saved Allied ships? Could it have ended the war faster? What if you'd been born 50 years later? Would you have become an engineer instead of an actress? A CEO instead of a starlet? Would you have been believed the first time? These thoughts don't make you bitter. They make you curious. Mainstream historical fact. Frequency-hopping spread-spectrum technology became the foundation of modern wireless communication, used in Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, GPS, and military encryption. In short, the 21st century runs on a concept first imagined by Hedy Lamarr and George Antile at a dinner table in the middle of World War II. You didn't just predict the future. You built a signal path for it. Now, on the fringes of the internet and tucked away in textbooks, your name has a second life. Hedy Lamarr, co-inventor. Hedy Lamarr, technology pioneer. No longer a footnote. Quirky tidbit. In the late 1990s, you learned how to use a basic home computer. Not for emails or games, but for design. You tried digital sketching and once joked you were learning to program the way some women take up knitting. You even considered writing software. At 80, historians still argue whether your patent was a moment of genius or a product of your desperation to help. But that question misses the point. It wasn't just genius, and it wasn't just desperation. It was you. All of you. The brain, the star, the immigrant, the inventor, the woman who knew the limits of her era and pressed on anyway. You're older now, yes, but there's still a notepad by your bedside. There's still a radio on your nightstand, tuned low, broadcasting static like a heartbeat. Some nights, You swear you hear the signals shifting, still dancing between frequencies like you designed them to. A music no one else notices. But you do. Always have. Always will. Because the signals never stop. They just evolve. The room is dim now, mostly by choice. You've come to prefer the soft edges of shadows, the way they blur everything into a kind of quiet. The light coming through the blinds slices across your lap like piano keys. 88 of them, in memory if not in fact. You think of George sometimes. Not the composer on stage, not the critic-dodging artist, but the man beside you at a table full of schematics and ambition. Two oddballs with different languages, but the same beat. You never saw him much after the war, but you always remembered that rare thing you shared, a creation that might outlive you both. Mainstream historical fact. George Antheil died in 1959, just weeks before your patent expired. He never saw its second life, never saw it spark recognition, never knew that two oddballs with a piano roll idea would one day lay the foundation for secure military comms and TikTok. You'd probably find that funny. But tonight, you're thinking about legacy. Not the Hollywood kind, with plaques and pavement stars, but the invisible kind. The kind that pulses through cables, bounces off satellites, whispers through phone towers. Every time someone calls their mom from an airplane, you're there. Every time someone shares a live video from a protest, you're there. Every time someone types "Where am I?" into a device that answers instantly, you're there, buried in the blueprint. Fringe tidbit. You used to walk your property line in heels, holding a transistor radio to test signal interference. The neighbors thought you were eccentric. You were. But you also understood something they didn't. If the future was wireless, then the air itself was terrain to be mapped. Historians still argue whether the world is truly caught up with your story, or if it just occasionally stumbles over it, surprised to find a Hollywood face at the root of digital security. The headlines still call it ironic. You never thought it was. You once said, "I'm not ashamed of being beautiful. I'm just angry that it's all anyone ever noticed." You weren't asking to be less seen. You were asking to be fully seen. And now there's a scholarship in your name. Now you are in the National Inventors Hall of Fame. Now when a young girl searches women in tech, she sees your face, staring back from a sepia portrait. Cheekbones sharp, eyes sharp and skeptical. She might not know the full story, but she knows it was possible. And that's enough. You leave fewer notes these days. Your hands tire quickly, but your mind still flips through frequencies, still listens for static, still smiles at the thought that somewhere out there the signal goes on, unbroken, unscrambled, unstoppable. You once feared being forgotten. Now you know better. Even if no one remembers your name, the signal still remembers you. There's a softness to everything now. The walls, the light, even time itself. Mornings drift into afternoons with no clear boundaries, and the sharp edges of memory blur into a kind of gentle glow. You don't mind it. You've spent a lifetime keeping your mind sharp. Now, you finally let yourself feel. On your nightstand is a small stack of clippings, printouts of online articles, yellowing interviews, a dog-eared magazine cover from the early 2000s. At the top of the pile, bold headline, "The Mother of Wi-Fi." Underneath it, your face, still poised, still mysterious, a Mona Lisa of modems. You chuckle softly when you see it, not because it's wrong, but because it took them so long to get it right. Mainstream historical fact. In 2014, almost 14 years after your death, you were posthumously inducted into the National Inventors Hall of Fame. Your name sits alongside Edison, Tesla, Bell, and now Lamarr. It's official. It's permanent. But truth be told, you knew long before they carved it into any wall. Because invention isn't about credit. It's about change. Fringe tidbit. You once joked that if they ever made a movie about your life, it should be called Frequency Hopping with Lipstick. Then you paused, dead serious, and added, "And make sure they don't cut out the smart parts." Historians still argue whether you were more inventor than actress, or more actress than inventor. But they missed the point. You were both. You lived in two worlds. You spoke in both tongues. You knew how to bat your lashes and bounce radio waves in the same breath. That duality, it wasn't a contradiction. It was the signal. It was the invention. You changed what was possible for science, for women, for anyone ever told they couldn't be more than one thing. The lights dim. You lie back, listening to the radio static that's always been there, even when no one else heard it. The whisper of invention, of persistence, of time catching up. You close your eyes. You did your part. You sent the signal. And finally, it's been received. Now take a long breath. Let it out slowly. You've just traveled across decades of light and static, of ideas blooming where no one expected them, of invisible messages bouncing across time. A life lived not only in the spotlight, but deep in the circuitry beneath it. You feel the weight of Hedy's story settle in your chest, cool and curious. All those nights of scribbling in secret, all those blueprints dismissed, all those frequencies hopping from her brain into the future. They echo now, quietly, in the room around you. There's a comfort in knowing that the world finally caught up, that brilliance can outlast the silence, that even when a voice is ignored, its signal still spreads. So let your thoughts soften. Let your mind slow its hopping. Imagine yourself surrounded by old notes, gentle static, and the flicker of signal towers on some distant hillside, blinking in time with your breath. You are safe. You are still. You are part of a world built, quietly, invisibly, by people like Hedy, who dared to invent beneath the noise. Let that thought carry you now into sleep, into quiet, into that soft hum between the frequencies. Shoo, the signal's still out there. But you can rest.